This is TWiT.
Sometimes you don't have to work very hard, Leo, to penetrate a network.
Sometimes the network penetrates you.
Sometimes it just says, come on, baby. You know, what are you waiting for? Cisco has recently been dealing with a problem that is anything but latent. As we've often observed, really, really bad vulnerabilities, I mean, really, really bad ones, are typically awarded a CVSS score of 9.8. And that's generally as high as it goes. And even that, even a 9.8, is quite difficult to earn. And I respect the reticence to go any higher, since we would like to reserve any assignment of 9.9 or 10.0 for those really just too horrible to believe problems.
The Nadia Comaneci of exploits.
Indeed. So this means that Cisco's recent award of a CVSS of 10.0 really does mean something. What does it mean? It means that almost overnight, more than 42,000 of Cisco's high-end publicly exposed internet routers and switches were compromised and taken over. Like I said, that's what you want to reserve those 10.0s for. The first known instances of attacks against Cisco's iOS, and that's not Apple iOS. This, for Cisco, iOS is Internet Operating System. So Cisco's iOS XE-based routers and switches, which appear to have been, that is, the first instances of attacks appear to have been initial proof-of-concept probing incursions, occurred at the end of last month on September 28th. Then more than 3 weeks passed before Cisco finally released the first fixes last Monday on October 16th, so 8 days ago. During those intervening 3 weeks, more than 42,000, not like, 100, critical, on the edge, internet connected switches and routers, 42,000 of these iOS XE based devices are known to be compromised. And again, not were scanned by Shodan and found to be vulnerable. No, were known to be compromised because the malware was detected in them. And as I said, compromise means full and effectively devastating takeover of the device. We know that it was 42,000 devices because scanners were quickly created by security firms who wanted to track incursions. And in response to the visibility of their initial implants, the perpetrators of these attacks then updated their malware to make it less visible. To all of this, the tech press responded as we'd expect. Just yesterday, SC Media led with what the Cisco iOS XE 0-day reveals about potential risk management blind spots. HelpNet Security wrote disappearing implants, followed by first fixes for exploited Cisco iOS XE 0-day. CRN wrote, Cisco releases first in series of patches for iOS XE vulnerabilities. A day earlier on Sunday, Bleeping Computers founder Lawrence Abrams wrote, hackers update Cisco iOS XE backdoor to hide infected devices. Dark Reading wrote, cyber attackers alter implant on 30,000, and they meant 42,000, but okay, compromised Cisco iOS XE devices. And the Register did not disappoint with their headline, Cisco fixes critical iOS XE bug, but malware crew way ahead of them. Initial fall in infected devices indicates evolution, not extinction, of attacking code. So, in today's show notes, I have a chart which shows the initial infection rise, which looks like it took about 2 days from the 16th of October to the 18th of October, 2 days, and we hit 42,000 infected devices. Looks like the majority were in Asia. They barely outflanked North America, which was in number 2. Then came Europe, then Africa, then Oceania, and then others. So it peaked 2 days after on October 18th, and then just around the 20th, we see it dropping like right back down to zero. We already know that there's no way 42,000 devices randomly scattered out on the internet got themselves patched in like a day. That was the malware deciding, whoops, we made ourselves too easy to spot. We're going to go undercover. In other words, what we now have is a very real first-class CVSS of 10.0 mess. As I mentioned, the news of this broke publicly for the first time on the 18th. And the chart that chart in the show notes shows that this corresponded with the peak of the detectable infections. The problem that Cisco revealed was a 0-day, now known as CVE 2023-20198, which exists in the web, I can't even believe I'm saying this, the web admin panel of its iOS XE operating system. I can't count the number of times I've said on this podcast that all of our experience teaches us that it is absolutely never safe to expose any web-based administration to the public internet. As an industry, collectively, we've proven that we simply do not yet know how to do that safely. We keep thinking we do, but all of our experience says, no, you don't. If a network's management environment absolutely requires remote management access to a publicly addressable router or switch, then use a VPN to connect to the private network behind the device. Then access its web interface from the inside. Never expose any management level web interface to the public internet. There's just no reason to. Ease of access obviously also applies to the bad guys. You know, you're making their access easy. That's not what you want. And really, in this instance, Cisco is at fault here in the year 2023. Not because they made a mistake. As we know, that can happen to anyone, but because it's even possible in this day and age to configure their devices to expose a web admin interface to any publicly routable network. It should not be possible. This is all enterprise-grade high-end equipment. Anyone using it should have VPN technology falling out of their pockets. So only exposing web admin to private networks would never impose a burden on their administration. And if Cisco had implemented such a policy, 42,000 plus recently compromised and now much more difficult to find routers and switches would not be compromised. And Cisco could then safely make all the mistakes they might want with their web admin authentication without it ever creating what essentially is a global catastrophe. And also note that this does not only apply to the enterprise, that is this as strongly worded as I could possibly make it, advice does not only apply to the enterprise or to enterprise class devices. It applies right now, today, to every one of us. Remember, it was an exactly analogous flaw in a Plex media server web admin interface, which was located in the home of a LastPass developer that was responsible for all of us having our LastPass vaults stolen and now being targeted for selective decryption. Unlike the Cisco case, it's probably asking too much for Plex to disallow internet-facing administration. But that individual, that LastPass developer, who was deep into the security space as a developer at LastPass, should have done so him or herself. And everyone listening to this podcast should consider that too. VPNs and overlay networks are now so freely available that it's only a matter of taking the time to set them up. Okay, enough preaching and ranting. In today's case with Cisco, the 0-day allowed threat actors to create an admin account with the highest level of privilege. In Cisco land, it's level 15, on devices that had their web UI panel exposed to the internet. After some additional investigation, the presence of a second 0-day was also discovered being used by the attackers to inject commands into the iOS XE file system that would execute with root privilege. Well, that's never good. Cisco revealed that the exploit chain was being used to inject a Lua-based backdoor on devices across the world. Cisco initially believed that the second 0-day was the exploitation of a previously fixed bug that was from 2021, CVE 2021-1435, but in an update late last Friday, Cisco said the attackers had discovered and were using a new 0-day, now assigned CVE 2023-2273. But believe it or not, both Cisco and CISA confirmed that the 2-year-old patched flaw was also being exploited in the wild by a different threat actor in a different campaign. In other words, there are still machines out there where flaws are being exploited, a 0-day flaw from 2 years ago, further demonstrating that those 43,000 known to be penetrated routers and switches didn't just get miraculously patched in a day. We've still got them out there that haven't been patched for the last 2 years. So like I said, there's never a good reason to expose all of this management, web interface management UI to the internet. Just turn it off. Don't do it. Manage from behind and use an overlay network or a little VPN server. Trivial to set up these days if you need remote access. The other thing that was interesting was that the Lua backdoor that was originally placed on all 42,000 plus hacked Cisco iOS XE devices since late September started disappearing over this last weekend. Estimates from both Census and Shadow Server, who were scanning the internet doing all this, put the number of hacked devices at the number I've been quoting, 42,000 plus iOS XE routers and switches. And over the course of a couple days, as we know, that number of exposed known compromised devices dropped down to between 500 and 1,000. So who knows why it didn't go to zero. There are apparently more than one actor at work here. And consequently, it's believed that this change was made by the threat actor itself. The Lua backdoor was not originally a particularly strong method of persistence, since it could be removed with a device reboot. So it was only RAM resident at that point. And its public visibility was attracting too much attention to the attacker's operations. Several security researchers pointed out that the Lua backdoor would likely have been replaced by something much more insidious. Very similar to the way Chinese hackers evaded Barracuda's patches earlier this year to entrench themselves so deeply into the compromised appliances that Barracuda wound up telling their own customers that they probably should just replace the gear to be safe. There was no other way to really know for sure.
Jeez.
Yeah, it's really, really bad. So at this point, we don't know that anything like that has happened, but when vulnerabilities have been discovered, which we know allows for the injection of commands into the device's file system with root privileges, given sufficient time, and these attackers had 3 weeks, it's clear that anything could have been done. So today, the internet might well currently have something on the order of 42,000 compromised Cisco routers and switches where their compromises have gone stealth after some threat actor somewhere, we don't know who, finished burrowing in. And at this point, we'll never know exactly which routers and switches are affected. Once a device, as we know, once a device or a network has been compromised, can we ever fully trust it again? Today, we have patches for both the known 0 days that have made this possible. But applying the patches, of course, is only the first step. Even if some of the horses have left the barn, it's still worth closing the door. But you may still have some loose horses. Any enterprise whose Cisco Edge gear may have been compromised would be well served to, unfortunately, perform a full and deep security audit into what may have happened on that device over the last month. At this point, no one in the InfoSec community has made even a tentative attribution. No one is suggesting who the bad guys are. There's no malicious actor who would not be interested in penetrating Cisco's iOS XE gear, from hacktivists to advanced persistent threat operators, from initial access brokers, IABs, to botnet operators. Could be anybody. And we do need to give Cisco a little bit of credit where it's due. It was they who discovered this new pair of 0 days during their investigation of a customer's support ticket. Another vendor might not have bothered to engage a competent security team to really dig into the trouble's root cause. Cisco did. What they found was certainly troubling. And I would argue it should not have happened in the first place, because you just should not be able to put a web management UI out on the public interface. Anyway, the takeaway for each of us individually should be that our own networks should never expose anything like that publicly. You should never have your own router's web management interface enabled on the internet, regardless of how well chosen your username and password may be. And the same goes for Synology, Plex, and everything else. As I said, just take the time to set up a simple overlay network or your own VPN server to allow you to access those devices from the inside. And I'll just note that this made me think of this. One of the things I have long wanted to do was to expand GRC's Shields Up service port only scan to check all 65536 ports for its users. Back when I first wrote all of that code, I was running GRC's server from here at home over a pair of 1.54 megabit T1 connections. I was unable to offer to scan 64 times more ports in a reasonable amount of time. Today, I could do that easily from level 3. So, on the back of my list, once I get to a place where I can turn my attention back to Shields Up, which won't be until after SpinRite 7 exists and has been released, I think it would be fun to boost Shields Up so that it's able to scan all of an individual's ports. because, who knows what it would show you that you might not even be aware of has opened incoming traffic through your router. We need to find out.
Hey, I'm Rod Pyle, editor-in-chief of Ad Astra Magazine, and each week I join with my co-host to bring you This Week in Space, the latest and greatest news from the final frontier. We talk to NASA chiefs, space scientists, engineers, educators, and artists, and sometimes we just shoot the breeze over what's hot and what's not in space, books, and TV. And we do it all for you, our fellow true believers. So whether you're an armchair adventurer or waiting for your turn to grab a slot in Elon's Mars rocket, join us on This Week in Space and be part of the greatest adventure of all time.